So, one of the things that people with insomnia really find invalidating is the use of things like sleep restriction therapy when their objective total sleep duration is already extremely low. And it kind of feels very frustrating when they're like, dude, I only sleep 1 or 2 hours a night. Like, what are you telling me to do? Like, all the things that you're telling me maybe work for the guys that sleep 6 or 7 hours, and maybe they're just spending like an hour or two in the middle of the night, awake. But you're telling me who spends 1 or 2 hours out of 8, 9, 10 hours actually sleeping to do this, like you are crazy. So in this video, I do really want to address this reasonable concern, and I do want to highlight that the efficacy of CBTI treatment for people who have objectively short sleep durations can be a little bit more muddy compared to people who don't have objectively short sleep duration. So I want to provide a few thoughts and musings that could be helpful for those of you who actually struggle a lot with getting enough sleep. If you don't know me, my name is Dr. Parky. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I did my postdoctoral fellowship specifically in behavioral sleep medicine at Stanford's Sleep Health and Insomnia program. I'm also the author of a self-help book known as The Insomnia Paradox, and I love sharing all things evidence-based when it comes to behavioral sleep medicine, so hopefully you get something helpful out of these videos as well as my channel. So the reason why I use objective short sleep durations because there are also a subset of people who struggle with subjective short sleep duration. So these are the people who say, I'm getting 1 or 2 hours of sleep per night, but if they go into a sleep study, an overnight sleep study where they kind of measure your brain waves and categorize periods of sleep and wake, they're actually spending a lot more time in bed asleep than they were really thinking. And this comes from a phenomenon known as sleep state misperception, where there's been studies done to showcase that when people are woken up at different stages of sleep, people who struggle with insomnia are much more likely to, when they wake up, to say, no, I was totally awake the entire time. And for compared to people who are good sleepers, they're usually coding that time as actual sleep. So in fact, one study looked at people woken up at stage 2 sleep, which is a sort of lighter stage of sleep, where almost 80% of people with insomnia said, no, I was totally awake during those times, whereas only 20 or 30% of good sleepers said they were awake during that period. So there's a substantial difference in sort of the estimation of wake and sleep in people with insomnia compared to good sleepers. And a good example of sleep state misperception would be like, for example, when I'm lying in bed and my wife wakes me up and says, like, stop sleeping so early, you need to sleep later. And I'm like, no, I was totally awake the whole time. And she'd be like, no, dude, you were like snoring already. And so, in that case, like, even though I perceive myself to be kind of still be in sort of that restful awake state, she could obviously clearly see that I was sleeping and snoring. So if you're somebody who notices that there are certain hours throughout the night where it kind of feels like you're tossing and turning, and then suddenly it's light out, or it kind of feels like you didn't sleep, but there was like a 3 hour period where it just kind of seems like it disappeared, those might be good evidence that you're not necessarily getting as little sleep as you think. There might be a few hours of like lighter sleep that could be happening that your brain isn't encoding into memory as sleep because you have maybe these awakenings where your mind remembers each one because of the higher levels of arousal, and as the result, it becomes seen as all awakenings, even though there were pockets of sleep in between. Now, let's talk a little bit about people who might actually have an objectively low amount of total sleep time. So, what is actually happening when these people have 3 or 4 hours a night, every night in perpetuity? What could be some things that we can do to address and unmask some of these sleepiness? So, a couple things that I can think about would be what are some behaviors that could be impacting our appetite for sleep, how hungry we are asleep at the end of the night, as well as our ability to kind of de-arouse and reduce arousal levels, especially at nighttime, so that when we do go to bed with this hunger, we're actually able to expend it all. So in terms of the first one, building this appetite for sleep, I would be considerate about any behaviors during the day that could be sucking up some of the sleep pressure at night. So is there any napping happening throughout the day? Is there any evening dozing? Is there times like on the weekends where they're sleeping 10 or 11 hours to really catch up on the weekdays? Are there any of those behaviors that could be affecting our ability to produce higher levels of deep sleep at night? And then from an arousal perspective, so arousal we can think of as like the competing force against sleep pressure. So if we're really hungry for sleep, but we're like so stressed out about sleep and we're so in such a this sort of fight or flight response at nighttime, you can imagine that it competes with the sleep pressure that makes it hard for us to get the sleep that we need. So is there a way that when we go to bed that we can intentionally wind down so that we're not in sort of like a jittery fight or flight mood, and we're able to capitalize on the increased sleep pressure to be able to get a little bit more of that sleep? And another piece to consider is your overall sleep need. How do you feel during the day after a night's rest? So, are you somebody who maybe just needs fewer hours of sleep? Maybe you just need 5 or 6 compared to someone who needs 7 or 8. That could be one way to really think about that. Your sleep need is already being met one way or the other, especially if how you feel during the day is generally feeling okay. But if you're somebody who is still feeling quite tired and fatigued, then certainly it might be worthwhile to really consider how do I make sure that I'm reducing my arousal levels in the middle of the night to make sure that I'm getting as much sleep as I can possibly get and allow that sleep to penis to unfold. And outside of more hypnotics or other types of medication, one thing that I might suggest is that if you are someone who's a bit of a shorter sleeper and it feels like you're only getting a few hours of sleep at night, to still have some protected time for rest. So to say, okay, I may be just sleeping a few hours, but I'll still give myself at least 6 hours time in bed. And that is my time to almost have this enforced dark rest where I close all the screens, the blinds, my eyes are closed, and I allow for as much sleep and rest to happen as much as possible because rest in and of itself can be quite restorative. So we can take a bit of a rest the second best approach just to see if it allows for us to feel just a little bit better during the day. So I really do want to validate, especially for the people who struggle with getting enough sleep and feel like they're just getting a few hours of night. Like that is a really frustrating and really horrible experience. I do hope that some of these strategies you can apply into your life that offers a little bit more wiggle room for the amount of sleep you're getting and helping you feel a little bit better during the day. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.